The night smelled of smoke and sorrow. What little fire had been burning in the ruined cabin was nothing more than a scatter of orange coals, half buried under ash. The wind came low from the ridge, carrying with it the bitter scent of charred wood and scorched cloth. She was there, huddled in the corner where the wall had half collapsed, her dress streaked with soot, her face pale beneath the grime. Her fingers trembled as she tried to rake together what sparks remained, but each effort died out, leaving only smoke curling into the darkness. They had left her there, left her to freeze among the ashes. The cowboy saw her as he stepped through the broken frame of the doorway. His boots crunched against the burnt timber, and the glow of the dying coals flickered weakly against the brim of his hat. Her eyes lifted at the sound, wide and hollow. She didn't speak, only watched him with a kind of stunned disbelief, as if she had already resigned herself to being alone. He dropped to a knee without a word. His hands moved steady, practiced, gathering the scattered coals, coaxing them into a little mound. He pulled strips of kindling from his saddlebag, fed them carefully into the embers, then breathed deep, leaning close until the faintest flame caught. The fire stirred. It grew, slow but sure, licking at the kindling, pushing back the cold shadows. The glow stretched across her face, warming the pale skin, putting color back into the hollow of her cheeks. She finally spoke, her voice hoarse. They were gone before the roof fell, didn't even look back. He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed on the fire, on the fragile thread of flame that he kept alive with patience. Then, quietly, he said, "Doesn't matter who turned their back. You ain't gonna die in these ashes." The fire crackled steady now, throwing its warmth across the broken cabin, and for the first time, since she'd been left, she believed him. The fire grew, snapping and hissing as it claimed the dry wood. Its light spilled across the ruined cabin, painting the walls in restless orange. She sat close now, her shoulders trembling beneath the soot-stained shawl, her palms extended toward the warmth, like someone afraid it might vanish at any second. The cowboy lowered himself onto a broken beam across from her. He tugged his coat tighter, but not because of the cold. His eyes stayed on her, studying the cuts across her arms, the way her lips quivered, even as she tried to hold them still. "They left you here," he said at last, his voice gravel. "Folks you trusted?" Her throat worked as though the answer was caught there. She finally nodded, and the sound that followed was small, almost ashamed. "My kin, my own blood." The fire popped, filling the silence that followed. He leaned forward, feeding another stick into the flames. "Blood don't always mean loyalty." Her gaze lifted from the fire to his face. There was no pity in his tone, only a hard, steady truth that cut through the hollow space inside her. For the first time, she realized this man wasn't here by accident. He'd come in, knowing what he'd find. She swallowed, her voice breaking when she whispered, "They told me I was too weak. Said I'd slow them down." The cowboy's jaw tightened. He glanced at the doorframe, out toward the black stretch of night where tracks led away from the cabin. His hand brushed the revolver on his hip, almost unconsciously. "They're wrong," he said flatly. "You're still here. That's strength enough." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire filled the space between them, pushing back the cold. But outside, the wind carried another sound, faint at first, then clearer. The jingle of tack, hooves grinding against frozen earth. Her head snapped toward the noise, fear flashing in her eye. "They're coming back!" The cowboy rose in one motion, steady and deliberate, his shadow stretching long across the firelit floor. He pulled his coat from his shoulders and dropped it across hers, before stepping toward the door. "Then let 'em," he said, and his hand settled on the iron at his hip. The night air bit sharp as the cowboy pushed open the splintered door. Moonlight spilled across the clearing, and in the distance dark shapes shifted against the snow. Riders, 3, maybe 4, moving slow, careful, the way men ride when they know someone's waiting. Inside, the firelight flickered over her face. She clutched his coat tighter around her shoulders, her breath ragged. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to vanish back into the shadows, but she couldn't take her eyes off the doorway. The cowboy stood framed against the night, his broad back a wall between her and the sound of hooves. He didn't flinch, didn't reach for his revolver too fast. Instead, he let his hand rest easy on the worn leather grip, like a man who'd been here before. The riders drew closer, their voices carrying across the frozen ground. "Cabin still smoking. Thought she'd be ash by now." A low laugh followed. "Maybe the fire didn't finish her. Guess we'll finish the job." Her stomach turned to stone. The words struck like a blade, carving open the fear she'd tried to bury. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling the sound that threatened to escape. The cowboy shifted his stance, planting his boots firm in the doorway. He didn't turn toward her when he spoke, but his voice carried low, steady, enough to steady her too. "Stay behind the fire. Don't move till I tell you." She wanted to argue, wanted to say she couldn't sit while he faced the men who'd left her for dead, but the weight in his tone pinned her still. Something about the way he said it, like the storm outside wasn't half as dangerous as defying his word, made her obey. The riders broke the tree line. Horses snorted clouds into the cold air, iron shoes crunching in the frost. One of them swung down, rifle slung over his shoulder. "You there," he barked, his grin shining in the moonlight. "Step aside. That one inside belongs to us." The cowboy's answer came slow, measured, every word heavy as stone. "She belongs to no one." And with that, his thumb drew back the hammer of his Colt, the sharp click echoing into the night like the crack of thunder before the storm. The clearing went still. The only sound was the wind crawling through the pines and the restless stamping of the riders' horses. The man who'd dismounted grinned wider, yellow teeth catching the moonlight. "You don't know what you're standing in the way of," he said, shifting his rifle from shoulder to hand. "She ain't worth the fight you're fixing to lose." From behind the fire, her breath caught sharp. Worth. The word dragged at her like chains. For weeks she'd been treated like less than a person, a burden, a problem to burn and bury, and now, standing between her and that fate, the cowboy didn't even twitch. He spoke like a man carving his words into the frozen air. "She's worth every damn bullet I've got." The rider sneered, lifting his rifle higher. But before the stock could settle, the cowboy stepped forward into the moonlight. The fire inside the cabin still burned behind him, throwing his shadow long across the snow. His hand never wavered on the revolver. "I'll give you one chance," he said, his voice flat, quiet enough that they had to lean in to hear. "Turn around. Leave her. Ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Do that, and you walk away breathing." The three still mounted shifted uneasily. One muttered something under his breath. Another tugged at his reins, but the man on the ground, the one with the rifle, spat in the dirt. "You don't scare us, drifter." A crack split the night. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of her hand slamming against her mouth to keep from crying out. Because she saw the way the cowboy's thumb eased the revolver's hammer back, the way the cold metal gleamed, and she knew what came next. The standoff stretched, tight as a wire ready to snap. Horses pawed, the fire hissed. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out the world. And then, in the frozen silence, the cowboy whispered, so soft it was almost for her alone, "They'll have to walk through me first." The riders' laughter died. The storm of violence was seconds away, hanging heavy in the night like a storm cloud ready to break. The man with the rifle sneered, teeth flashing under the moon. His finger twitched on the trigger. For a moment, it seemed he might call the cowboy's bluff. But the cowboy never bluffed. The crack of his revolver shattered the night. The rider's rifle clattered into the snow before his body followed it, face first, a dark stain blooming beneath him. The horses screamed, hooves tearing at the frozen ground. The other three men wheeled in confusion, their curses breaking into shouts as they fumbled for their guns. The cowboy was already moving. One shot barked, then another. Two shadows toppled from their saddles, hitting the earth with heavy thuds. A third horse bolted into the trees, its rider hanging half loose, screaming as he tried to stay mounted. And then silence. Smoke curled lazily from the barrel of the cowboy's revolver, its glow lit orange by the cabin fire behind him. His chest rose and fell slow, steady, while the corpses lay cooling in the snow. Inside the cabin, she was still crouched by the hearth. Her hands shook, pressed against her lips. The fire popped, and she flinched, expecting more gunshots, but none came. The cowboy turned. His eyes found hers across the distance, steady, unbroken. "It's over," he said. But his voice carried no triumph. It was heavy, like the snow itself had pressed down on him. He holstered the revolver and walked back to the cabin, boots crunching through blood-soaked frost. When he reached the door, he stopped, looking down at her where she sat trembling. "They won't be coming." "Nang back," he said quietly. Her breath trembled out of her. Relief, fear, gratitude, all tangled until no word could untangle them. She only nodded, tears slipping free down her soot-streaked face. And then, gently, he knelt, his shadow wrapping her as much as his coat had. "You're safe now," he whispered. For the first time since the fire started, she believed it. Morning came grey and cold, the kind of light that made the world feel half asleep. Smoke still rose in thin ribbons from the cabin's blackened frame, curling against the pale sky. The snow around it was trampled, broken, and stained dark in patches that wouldn't wash away. The cowboy was already outside when she stepped into the light. His hat was low over his brow, his coat pulled tight, a shovel gripped in his gloved hand. 3 mounds of earth stood crooked near the tree line, each one marked by a rough wooden cross he'd cut before dawn. She didn't speak, just watched as he pressed the last of the dirt down, slow and heavy. "They won't trouble you again," he said finally, not looking up. His voice was flat, stripped of everything but truth. Her throat tightened. "You buried them." "Every man deserves the ground," he answered. Then he lifted his eyes to hers, steel blue and tired. "But don't mistake it for forgiveness." The weight of it settled between them. She looked back at the cabin, her home, or what was left of it. The ashes still carried the shape of walls, but nothing more. No bed, no table, no roof to keep the winter out. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. He followed her gaze. "There's nothing for you here." "I know." The words caught in her throat. She bit them back, then tried again. "But I don't know where else to go." He set the shovel down, the wood thudding against frozen ground. For a long moment he just stood there, watching her as if weighing something deep eyes, and sighed. Finally he said, "Then you ride with me, just until you find your feet." Her eyes widened. "Why?" "Because I was there," he said simply. "Because I couldn't walk away." She blinked hard, but the tears still came, hot against the cold air. She nodded once, too fast, as if afraid the offer might vanish if she hesitated. The cowboy tipped his hat, turned toward the tethered horses, and began saddling them. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, not heavy, but steady, like the first fragile beam of morning light. When she finally climbed into the saddle, his hand lingered at her elbow, steadying her. She looked down at him, her lips trembling on the edge of a thank you she couldn't quite say. He didn't need it. The horses started forward, hooves crunching through the snow. Behind them, the cabin smoldered, and the crosses stood crooked in the ground. Ahead, the long road cut into the wilderness, endless and uncertain. She shivered, pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, and looked toward the horizon. For the first time in too long, the future wasn't just shadows. And the cowboy rode beside her, silent, steady, like a man who had seen storms before and knew how to outlast them. The road out of the valley was no road at all, just a ribbon of frozen earth and drifted snow cutting between the pines. The wind carried sharp through the trees, rattling their branches like bones. She leaned forward in the saddle, fingers clenched on the reins. Every breath frosted in front of her lips, every muscle ached from the cold. Still she pressed on, because turning back wasn't an option. The cowboy rode just ahead, his frame steady in the saddle, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. His horse's hooves beat a slow, certain rhythm, and hers fell into step behind, as if both animals trusted his lead. At midday they stopped by a creek where the water still moved under a skin of ice. He slid from his horse, boots crunching in the snow, and offered her a hand down. She took it without thinking, her legs weak when they touched the ground. "You'll freeze if you don't eat," he said, pulling a strip of dried venison from his saddlebag. He held it out, plain and simple. She hesitated, then took it. The meat was tough, sharp with smoke and salt, but she chewed anyway, her stomach clenching with hunger. "You always carry food like this?" she asked, her voice low, almost breaking the silence. He shrugged. "A man doesn't last long out here if he doesn't plan ahead." He glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You'll need to learn that." Her cheeks burned, not from the cold this time, but from the thought that she'd been so unprepared, so helpless. She turned away, looking at the frozen creek instead of him. The cowboy let the silence stretch, then bent to fill a tin cup with water. He broke the ice with his knife, dipped it, and handed it to her. "Drink slow." The water bit cold and sharp on her tongue, but it steadied her. They rode again before the sun dipped. The light thinned, shadows stretching long across the snow. Every sound felt louder in the darkening woods, the snap of a branch, the cry of a hawk, the distant echo of wolves. Her chest tightened with fear, and she stole a glance at him. He rode calm, hand resting near the grip of his revolver, eyes always scanning the tree line. Not careless, not afraid, just ready. When the first stars pricked through the sky, he finally slowed. "We'll make camp here." They stopped in a hollow between two great boulders. He dismounted, struck a spark from flint and steel, and coaxed a fire to life with patient hands. She crouched close, hands stretched toward the flames, her eyes reflecting their light. He watched her quietly for a moment before unrolling a blanket from his saddle. Without a word, he draped it around her shoulders. She looked up at him, startled. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Taking care of me," she whispered. The fire poured up between them. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared into the flames. Then his voice came low, steady, almost lost in the crackle. "Because someone should have." Her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. She pulled the blanket tighter, not just for the warmth of wool, but for the weight of his words. Above them, the stars wheeled cold and endless. The night was long, the wilderness harsher still, but she wasn't alone anymore, and that was enough. The fire burned low, crackling faintly as the cold crept back in. She sat with the blanket around her shoulders, watching the flames dance. The cowboy rested across from her, his back against one of the boulders, hat tipped low, but not asleep. She could tell by the way his hand never strayed far from his revolver. The forest around them was too still. No owls, no rustle of small animals, only the whisper of wind threading through the pines. That silence was worse than noise. It meant something was listening. She pulled the blanket tighter. "It's too quiet," she whispered. He lifted his head, eyes narrowing at the dark tree line. "You're not wrong." His voice was steady, but there was a weight in it. He slid his rifle from its scabbard, the metal faintly glinting in the firelight. Minutes stretched, slow as hours. The flames guttered, shadows bending and reaching across the hollow. Then it came, low, distant at first, but unmistakable. A howl. Her stomach knotted, the sound carrying across the frozen ridges. Another answered it, closer this time. Then a third, higher pitched, wolves. Her pulse quickened. What do we do? He rose, calm but sharp, movements sure. We hold. He stepped to the edge of the firelight, rifle braced against his shoulder. Stay low. Don't run. Fire's our shield. The brush cracked to the left. She caught a glimpse of eyes glowing in the dark, reflecting the fire like chips of glass. A shape slunk forward, grey fur bristling. Another shadow shifted to the right. Her breath came fast, shallow. The blanket slid from her shoulders, forgotten. The cowboy lifted the rifle, as steady as a stone. "Back off," he muttered. Not to her, but to the wild things in the dark. One of the wolves edged closer, teeth bared in a silent snarl. The cowboy fired. The shot split the night, echoing through the trees. The wolf yelped, spun, and vanished into the brush. The others held back, circling just beyond the glow. Their eyes moved with the shadows, watching, waiting. The fire popped, sparks leaping high as if even the flames were fighting. She reached out, fingers brushing his coat, not grabbing, not holding him back, just grounding herself against his steadiness. He didn't flinch. He stood between her and the dark, gun steady, breath controlled. The wolves howled again, farther this time, fading into the distance. Silence returned. Heavy but different now. Slowly, he lowered the rifle. His voice was quiet, rough-edged. "They won't try again tonight." She sank to her knees, trembling, the fear draining out of her body all at once. He turned, crouched in front of her, and touched her shoulder gently. "You did good. You stayed still." Her throat tightened. "I thought they'd take me." His eyes softened in the firelight. "Not while I'm here." The words weren't loud, weren't fierce, but they carried more weight than any promise she'd ever heard. The night closed in again, the cold sharp on the air, but she felt something stronger than fear rising in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but the start of it. And with that, she knew she could face the dawn.